Alright, so now the time-consuming and critical part of the install is the rod connection and alignment. So here's the rod that you got, and the way we're installing it, you're not going to use the clevis, so you can just take that off. Just unscrews. And you can hang on to it because you may want to install it differently or whatever, but you can always put it back on. What you're going to do is take the nut that came with the package and put that on the end of the rod. Doesn't have to go on very far as long as it's got up to the nylon part of the nut so it doesn't unscrew. That's all you need to do at this point. You can use it for adjustment once it's installed, so you can adjust both ends of the rod if you need to, but basically right now we're just going to put it on temporarily, or put it on just a little bit, so I'll do that right now. Okay, so now the nut's on, and you may notice my rod's bent a little bit because I've been using this one to install, and you're going to actually bend your rod to fit your exact situation, so don't worry that mine's bent or if yours is bent in the box, because you will want to bend it to fit your exact machine layout and where your bracket's screwed in and all that sort of thing. So once you have it like this, we're just going to go drop it in the game now, so we'll do that. So by now, you should have put everything back together, including the solenoid, and have the lighting installed, and I'll wrap around to that at the end, but I'm just still doing this video sort of piecemeal, so I don't have everything put back together, but to give you an idea of the rod and alignment procedure, basically you're going to take this rod and thread it down through the hole in the lid, and then it's going to go down through the original slot in the playfield that was supposed to be used for this, which is this slot right here. And then it's going to go into the servo. So what I suggest is right off the bat that you're going to bend the tip of the rod just a hair. And you can sort of see that it's bent about maybe, I don't know, 2/3 of the way down the threads, and just like maybe 5 degrees. And the reason for that is because if it's not bent, it will get hung up when it's trying to open on here. The rod being vertically straight and that hole being so deep, it will bind on the hole. So if you just give it a slight bend, and then you put the rod in, and you just got to make sure that it goes down through that slot. Doesn't matter where it goes right now. And then you may hit a wire or something, so just sort of get it down in there. And what's going to happen is you'll notice that if you bend this and you spin it the right way, it will sit nice and flush in there with it bent. What will happen is when the servo goes to open the lid, it will be able to pull all the way down. And you can sort of see how the nut is sitting flush against the bracket. And so that's what it needs to do. If it's too vertical, what will happen is when it starts to tip, it will bind up right about that point. You can see. So what you want to do is have that little bend in there, and then you'll see once you bend it all the way down, this rod will actually rotate into place where it needs to be. And so that's sort of a crucial point to make sure that this opens as much as you want it to. If you don't do that, then it will just bind up and won't open all the way. So once that's put all the way through down through the playfield, you're going to lift up the playfield and connect it to the servo. So here's something we didn't talk about yet is all of these wires. I sort of mentioned moving them out of the way, but really you're going to need to make sure that these are all tied back and out of the way, so that the rod's not in between all of them like it is here, and that this servo arm, when it moves, is not going to catch any of them. It only moves like 50 degrees, 55 degrees, so it's not really going to like rip them out or anything, but you don't want wear happening. So we'll include some zip ties. I'm sure you have some. Just take these wires and zip tie them back to the loom here, right here. Just bring them all together and get them back over there. Leave a little slack so they are free to hang there. Same thing with maybe this Ethernet cable here, and this is the one that goes to your star map if you have it. It'd be nice to get those out of the way and just make sure that all this is clear. So you can see this rod's going under there, so I'm going to push it out of the way and get those wires freed up. And so now we're looking at this rod coming down through the slot that we just put through, and what you're going to do is need to slide it through this brass bushing. So you unscrew this hex head bolt screw, and that is I'm using a 3/32 hex head wrench. I'm sure millimeter, whatever, would work too. Basically, you just want to loosen this, and then the rod will be able to slide through. Now, one of the crucial alignment points is the fact that this servo has a 0-degree point, and your servo may not be set to that when you first get it. It's just sort of happenstance. I don't know how they ship them or what they're set at, but this four-armed mechanism here can be rotated. So basically, you just undo this screw at the end, and this guy comes off, and you can just rotate it where it needs to go and put it back on. So what you're going to need to do is plug in the power to the mod and turn on your game so that it cycles. And what will happen is it will set itself initially, after it gets power, to the fully closed position. And that will be at 55 degrees. And so when that is the case, you will then take this little gizmo off and loosen the screw, take it off, and then set it back so it's about in this position. Basically, so this is at the lowermost point, facing the ground. And that will give you the kind of play you need, I think, to adjust, to put the rod in and adjust it so it has the right travel and everything. It takes some adjustment. It will take a little bit of back and forth with this to get everything right, but that's about how you want to set it up. So once you've powered on the device with your game, so this harness will need to be plugged in, you turn your game on, you can go into test mode and just leave it there with the door open so none of the solenoids fire or anything, and then you'll be able to use the power on it. Once it sets itself to the 55-degree position by having power and doing its little locating thing, you can turn the game off. It doesn't need to be on after that to do the rest of this, just to test it, to do the alignment on and off. So if you're worried about working around the power in the game, you can certainly do that. Although with the door open, there should be no high power going to the solenoids, so should be fine. I'm using a 12-volt adapter or a DC adapter that's adjustable. It's 5 volts for this application, and I made a little harness to connect to this. So if you have that ability, certainly feel free to do that, and just wire this guy up to even temporarily to a 5-volt adapter, which is also a USB plug. You can do that. Can't use the USB here because that will not power the solenoid. It has to come through this connector. So once you have this located at the 0 position, or the 55-degree position, you're going to take this rod and slide it right through the brass bushing. And you're going to want to pull it through all the way. And so what I've done is started it, and then I'm going to reach my hand around the play field, see if I can do this at the same time, and just sort of help feed it through, pushing it down from the back of the chest and sort of sliding it through. Let's see. Am I getting it? Yeah, there we go. And, twisting it a little to help push it through. And once you get it all the way through and it's tight against the lid, then that's when you're going to be able to crank down the nut. And so basically, the lid's going to want to be in the closed position. I'm using my hand on the top of the playfield to push the lid closed and push that nut all the way against the top of the lid, the chest lid bracket. So that nut we were just looking at. So now I have the rod fully depressed against that bracket, the lid closed, and the rod all the way coming down through into that bushing. And you can see there's maybe about an inch extra rod there. And then I'm going to tighten down that lock nut. That's basically your first adjustment. You're going to just get it in there, get the lid closed, push the rod all the way through, and lock down that screw into that brass bushing there. So I'm going to do that now. So to give you an idea of what I was doing on the upper part of the playfield when I was talking there, is I was pushing the lid closed, and then I was putting my hand back here where that nut is on that rod and just making sure it's all the way up against the bracket, just pushing it down. So if I let this go, it's going to go like that. The lid's going to open because there's nothing keeping it closed. And so I'm just pushing it closed and pushing that rod all the way down against there. So I was using my right hand to hold those, and then you can come around here, and while that's being held, you'll just tighten down that screw. You can use your fingers just to give it finger tight, and then you can use the hex wrench, the Allen head, to tighten that down just like maybe an eighth or a quarter of a turn past hand tight. You don't want to go crazy on it because this is obviously just plastic and you don't want to break it. But you know, you want to get it pretty tight in there so it doesn't release and let the rod go. So there was that one bend in the top of the rod for the nut area, and then you can sort of see the rod comes down at an angle. Generally, that's going to be fine. That's almost all you need. What you could do if you're finicky and want to spend the time is you can put a kink in the rod. So it's coming down from there, and you want to sort of kink it out and straight, basically to align with the servo just a little bit better. It's only traveling 55 degrees, so it's not like there needs to be full rotation there and that rod has to clear everything. It's just going to go maybe an inch of travel up and down, so it's not really that big a deal, maybe less than that. But basically, these are your adjustments. You have the ability to slide this rod in and out of the bottom part here. You have the ability to loosen and tighten the nut on the top part of the rod, which is another sort of fine adjustment you can use. So for example, once you have this rod set, if you just need to make a little bit of adjustment, you can use that nut at the top to do that. Worst case scenario, you may need to relocate this guy using that procedure, undoing the screw and then adjusting it and putting it back on. That's really what needs to happen to make this work. I'm going to power mine with that adapter and show you sort of what you're going to look for to make this adjusted properly. But basically, when it has power and you'll have to use your game to give it power, you can just use your finger on this switch over here, the one that's going to get actuated by the forks, and just you can close it and open it, close it and open it, and that will make the chest open and close. The switch has a debounce delay on it, so it won't happen right away. You'll have to give it about half a second for it to actually trigger, and then it will queue up the movements. So if you do happen to go like this, it will open and close fully. It's not going to immediately change direction when you move the switch. So you have to pretend that you're actually the chest going up and down. It's not going to cycle the switch very quickly. It's going to hold it, and the chest is going to open or close, and it's going to be like that for a little bit until it lets go. So that's how you can test it when it has power without having to actually like raise and lower the forks. You can just use your finger here and let the chest do its work and then let go. The difficult part is that you can't really do this so well with the playfield propped up because there's no spring or any weight on the lid. It's all gravity based. So at this point, it's not going to close by gravity. So what you can do is if you want to adjust in this position, which is much easier to do, you can use your finger just to close the lid as if it were gravity. So what I'm suggesting is that to test the lid alignment, right now the lid's propped open like that automatically, and so that would be obviously the open position. So when you have the device in the open position, that's fine. When you want to test the alignment for the closed position, actuate the switch, and then when it's closed, you can just sort of push the lid as if you were gravity pushing it closed. Now you can see I can't close mine all the way. So that means the alignment's a little off. I need to adjust it just a bit more to let it come down all the way. But basically that's your test. And when you get really close like this, then you're going to want to start putting the playfield down and reaching under it through the coin door hole to be able to make that happen. Otherwise, you can also use the forks to make that happen in the coil test menu. You can raise and lower the forks in there, I believe, so I'll have to check that out. But that's the basic alignment procedure. It's back and forth. You have to do a little, test it, do a little, test it. Maybe you'll get it right on the first shot, but there will be a little back and forth probably for most people to get it so that it's aligned and actuating properly. So I'm going to stop this video, and that's just like the basics of the alignment, and then I'm going to go through and wire it up and show you, and then I'm going to also give another video on the controller management if you have the buttons for the lighting, which will give you some options for this. So that's basically it. I highly suggest making sure that you've cleared all the wires out of the way, everything's zip tied back, and that there's a clear path of travel for that rod and that servo. And otherwise, that's pretty much the install. So I'll stop this video and we'll get another one going for the fine adjustments.